Hi guys, so carrying on with our theme of running through the technical aspects of the Olympic lifts. Okay, today we're going to be talking about your jerks. All right, so initially today we're going to talk about your dip and drive. So obviously this can be applied to either your split jerk, your push jerk, or even your push press. Okay, that position is the same ideally for all three movements. Okay, so when you're going into that dip and drive position, all right, obviously you're going to have the bar up in your front rack. Okay, now obviously depending on your mobility, that might kind of determine how much of a grip you've got on the bar. All right, for some of you it might just be your fingers, others it might be more of a full grip. Okay, obviously the full grip does make things a little bit easier when you come to transition into taking the bar overhead. Okay, but equally you don't want to sacrifice your elbow position. Okay, you want to make sure that when you're holding the bar in that front rack position, the bar's nicely sat across your shoulder, where your shoulder's taking the weight. Okay, and you kind of across your collarbone, as opposed to feeling like you're holding the weight in your hands. Okay, so in order to do that, if you do need to relax your grip a little bit, then do, because that's going to make a big difference on your dip and drive. Okay, because if you're holding the bar with the weight more through your wrists, naturally that weight's going to sit further forward on your body, so you're more likely to be pulled forward in that dip and drive, which is then going to make going into your split much more difficult. Okay, so you always want to be in that nice elbows up, chest up position with the bar sat nicely on your shoulder, so that you're nice and balanced when you do go into that dip. Okay, and obviously with your feet in the dip, the width of your feet is up to you. Okay, there's always a little bit of personal preference. Generally, it's going to be slightly narrower than your squat stance. Okay, you normally find that you can produce a bit more power from that position, which obviously makes it easier when you're going into your split. Okay, the only reason that might be different is if you're someone who tends to end up with quite a narrow split, then we might get you setting up a little bit wider, because generally that's going to help you stay a little bit wider and be a little bit more balanced in your split. But we'll talk about that later on when we come to talk about that part of the movement. Okay, so like I say, generally you're going to be somewhere between hip width and slightly narrower than your kind of squat stance, but there's always a little bit of personal preference. Okay, with your feet, you're going to have your feet turned out ever so slightly, just like you would if you're setting up for a squat. Okay, and that's just going to help when it comes to that dip and dipping through your knees. It's going to help you stay upright, whereas if you go feet forward, you tend to have more of a tendency to dip forwards into your toes. Okay, which again puts you off balance, makes it a little more difficult to generate as much power. Okay, so when you do go into that dip, all right, obviously like I say, you're going to have your chest up. You want to try and keep your upper body as straight as possible. Okay, you want to try and avoid leaning forwards or obviously leaning backwards. Okay, so you want to imagine that you're dipping with your back up against the wall, and you're going to slide your upper body down the wall and back up, so you're making sure it stays nice and straight. Okay, obviously then with your dip, you're going to try and you are going to focus on keeping your weight back on your heels. Okay, so just like you would if you were doing a squat, we want kind of almost simultaneous movement between your hips and knees, so you stay nice and balanced. Okay, instead of going too far or doing too much of the movement with your knees and ending up on your toes. Okay, so it wants to be from that start position. You're going to dip by pushing your knees out and obviously bending your knees and hips. Okay, so that in the bottom of that dip, you should feel like your weight is completely on your heels, to the point where you should be able to wiggle your toes. Okay, you don't want it in that position. You don't want to be drifting forwards onto your tiptoes. Okay, obviously that's going to be the most balanced position for you to drive from, and it's a very strong position when you've got a lot of weight. Okay, you're not going to be pulled around. You're not going to feel too much pressure on your knees or your back. Okay, obviously then as you start that extension, you're going to do a very similar thing but in reverse. Okay, so what you don't want to do is come onto your toes first. Okay, just like what we went through on your snatches, you want to push through your heels first as you extend, and then coming onto your toes is the last thing you do. So in that top position, you've got that triple extension between your hips, knees and ankles. Okay, and like we said before, we want that to be as simultaneous as possible. Okay, so obviously if you come onto your toes earlier on in the lift, then you're making it much more difficult for yourself, because your ankles are going to be extended before your knees and hips, which is going to limit how much power you can produce. Okay, so when you drive out that dip, really focus on pushing through your heels. All right, obviously make it aggressive, and then when you get to the top of the movement, the top of your drive, you're really going to focus on squeezing your quads, squeezing your glutes. All right, obviously your calves are going to be fully extended, and that's going to help you get as much power as you can, but also make sure you're extending as vertically as you can. Okay, again, just so we're staying in control of that bar path, and so that you're staying nice and balanced in your split. Okay, so I hope that helps, guys. If you've got any questions, as always, give me a shout, okay? And in the next video, we'll have a run through your split itself.